The arrogant conquerors. The Sci-Fi Dominion was one of the most feared empires in the galaxy. Their fleet had conquered hundreds of planets, leaving behind nothing but ruins. No species had ever stood against them and survived. Their warships were massive, their technology far beyond what most civilizations could understand. And now, they had set their eyes on Earth. Supreme Commander Vorkal stood on the bridge of his flagship, Oblivion, gazing at the blue planet through the massive observation window. A smirk formed on his reptilian face. This is the famous human world. He scoffed. It looks insignificant. His officers laughed. Sci-Fi soldiers took pride in their strength, and to them, humans were nothing more than weak creatures, barely advanced enough to leave their own system. A communication request came through. The screen flickered, revealing a human diplomat, an older man with tired eyes but a firm posture. His voice was calm. "This is Ambassador Luther of the United Earth Council. We request peaceful negotiations." Vorkal burst into laughter. "Peaceful? What makes you think you have a choice?" He leaned closer to the screen. "We are Sci-Fi. We do not negotiate with lesser beings. Surrender your planet, and maybe we will let some of you live as servants." The humans did not react the way he expected. The ambassador simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "You assume we are weak. That is your mistake." The transmission ended. Vorkal frowned. That was unusual. Normally, species either begged for mercy or desperately tried to fight back. But humans? They were too calm. "Prepare the invasion," he ordered. "Crush them before they start begging." On Earth, deep beneath the surface, in an underground facility hidden from alien scanners, a team of scientists and military strategists were gathered around a holographic projection of the Sci-Fi fleet. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional flickering of the blue light from the screen. "How long until they attack?" one of the scientists, Dr. Renner, asked. "Less than 2 weeks," a military officer replied. "Their fleet is too large. Even if we use all our weapons, we won't last more than a day." "Then we must proceed with the experiment," another scientist said. "We have no other choice." A nervous silence followed. The experiment they spoke of was dangerous, untested. If it failed, Earth would be doomed. But if it succeeded, we will remind them why underestimating humans is a mistake, the commander finally said. Back on the Sci-Fi fleet, as the invasion force moved into position, the Sci-Fi soldiers continued to mock their enemy. "They haven't even tried to fight us yet," one laughed. "Maybe they are too afraid to respond." "They are weaklings," another agreed. "Nothing like the Yarn or the Tikari. At least those species tried to fight. But these humans, they are just waiting for us to take over." Supreme Commander Vorkal felt the same, but something still bothered him. Why had the humans been so calm? Most species either attacked in desperation or tried to flee, but humans had done neither. They had simply waited. He dismissed the thought. It didn't matter. Once the Sci-Fi forces landed, the humans would kneel like all the others before them. With a cruel grin, he turned to his officers. "Let them have their silence. Soon, Earth will burn." Little did he know, humanity was not preparing to fight back in a conventional way. They were preparing something far worse. Humanity's silent weapon. The Sci-Fi Dominion had conquered countless civilizations. To them, Earth was just another weak species waiting to be crushed. They had no idea what was coming. Sci-Fi command ship, Oblivion. Supreme Commander Vorkal watched the Earth below, arms crossed. The invasion fleet hovered above the planet like a storm waiting to break. "Commander, the humans are still silent. No counterattacks. No defenses raised," an officer reported. Vorkal narrowed his eyes. "They accept their fate. Begin orbital bombardment." But then the stars flickered. It was subtle at first, just a strange dimming of the light in space. The Zyphar officers barely noticed. Then, one of the navigation screens beeped an alert. "Commander, something strange is happening to the sun." Vorkal turned sharply. "Explain." The officer hesitated. "It's vanishing, sir." The bridge fell silent. For the first time, unease settled in. Zyphar technology was unmatched, but even they had no power over a star. Vorkal stepped forward. "What are you saying?" The officer's fingers danced over the console, pulling up a live visual of the Sol system. The view zoomed in on the sun, and every single Zyphar in the room froze. The bright golden star, the heart of Earth's solar system, was disappearing. A massive black sphere, darker than the void of space itself, had formed around the sun. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't an eclipse. It was consuming the light. The Zyphar were conquerors, warriors, beings who had never known fear. But as they watched the impossible happen, fear crept into their hearts. That's a Dyson cage," one of the officers whispered. "But that's impossible. That level of technology doesn't exist." A Dyson cage, the theoretical superweapon far beyond the understanding of most galactic civilizations. It was a structure so massive it could trap the energy of an entire star. And the humans had built one. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in a secret underground facility, human scientists and military leaders watched their screens in silence. The experiment had worked. Dr. Renner leaned forward, watching as the sun's light was slowly drained, trapped inside the artificial construct they had deployed. "The Zyphar won't understand what's happening," he said. "Good," the military commander responded. "Let them be afraid." This was humanity's silent weapon. They had not built warships to fight the Zyphar. They had built something much worse. They had stolen their own sun. And soon, they would unleash it. The night that never ended. The Zyphar had conquered thousands of planets, broken countless civilizations. They had expected Earth to crumble like all the others. But now, as their fleet hovered above the planet, they watched in horror as the sun disappeared before their eyes. Zyphar Command Ship, Oblivion. Supreme Commander Vorkal's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. His yellow eyes flicked between the dying light of the sun and the silent planet below. "Someone explain what's happening," he barked. His officers scrambled at their consoles. The readings made no sense. Stars didn't just vanish. "It's not destroyed, Supreme Commander," an officer stammered. "The sun is still there, but it's being drained, trapped inside a structure we don't understand." Vorkal's scales darkened. "Impossible. No species in this sector has that technology." Silence filled the bridge. The Zyphar were warriors, used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force. They had never encountered something like this before. And then, darkness fell. The last traces of sunlight vanished. For the first time in Zyphar history, they were afraid of the dark. Earth. Underground facility. Dr. Renner's fingers hovered over the control panel, watching the final readings come in. The Dyson cage had fully deployed. The Zyphar had no idea what was coming next. "The fleet is still in position," a military officer reported. "They're not retreating yet." "They won't," Renner replied. "Not until they understand what's happening. But by then, it'll be too late." Across the war room, screens showed real-time footage of the alien ships orbiting Earth. Thousands of warships, floating in the unnatural darkness, waiting for an enemy that refused to fight them the way they expected. But humanity had never fought fair. Renner glanced at the countdown timer. 5 minutes. Zyphar warship, Shadowfang. Captain Kravos paced the bridge, his sharp talons clicking against the cold metal floor. His crew whispered among themselves, unease growing with every passing second. "This is a trick," Kravos growled. "Humans don't have the technology to manipulate a star. This is some kind of illusion." "Sir," one of the navigators hesitated, "our power levels are dropping." Kravos turned sharply. "What?" The navigator gulped. Our reactors, they're draining. Every ship in the fleet is losing energy. Panic rippled through the crew. Sci-Fi ships were built for conquest, powered by fusion cores designed to last centuries. But now, those very cores were failing. And then, the first ship went dark. The Warlance, a Sci-Fi battlecruiser, lost all power at once. Its engines flickered, its weapons went silent. The mighty warship that had raised planets became nothing more than a floating metal coffin. One by one, more ships followed. Oblivion, Shadowfang, Nightpiercer. Their lights blinked out, swallowed by the darkness that humanity had unleashed. For the first time in Sci-Fi history, they were powerless. Earth. Control room. The countdown reached 0. A quiet voice crackled through the speakers. Phase 1. Complete. Dr. Renner exhaled. The experiment had worked better than expected. The Zephyr had walked into the trap willingly. They had laughed at humanity. Now, they were helpless. Their ships are floating dead in orbit, the military officer reported, barely hiding a smirk. Good, Renner said. Then let's begin Phase 2. The screen flickered, showing the dying Sci-Fi fleet, drifting in the endless, sunless void. And then, for the first time since the invasion began, humanity sent a message. The message from the void. The Sci-Fi had raised entire civilizations without hesitation. They had watched planets burn and laughed. But now, as they drifted helplessly in the lightless abyss, they felt something new. Fear. Sci-Fi command ship, Oblivion. Supreme Commander Vorkal clenched his jaw as the bridge remained eerily dark. His officers scrambled at their stations, but the screens were lifeless. The ship had lost all power. This is a temporary failure, Vorkal growled. Run a full system diagnostic. Silence. The officers stared at their leader. No one spoke. There was nothing to diagnose. Every Sci-Fi ship in orbit had gone completely dead. No weapons, no shields, no communication. They weren't just trapped. They were at humanity's mercy. Then, a sound cut through the silence. A slow, rhythmic knocking. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from inside the bridge. It was coming from space. Vorkal's blood ran cold. That was impossible. Nothing should have been able to reach them. Then, the main screen flickered. The ship's dead monitors, which had refused to respond for hours, suddenly displayed a single, grainy video feed. And there, a human stood. Earth, Deep Space Transmission Center. Dr. Renner leaned back in his chair, watching as the transmission went live. The entire Sci-Fi fleet could now see them. Humanity's first and only response to the invasion. A lone astronaut floated in the void, just outside the Sci-Fi flagship. No spacesuit, no visible equipment. He stood there as if the laws of physics did not apply to him. The image was distorted, as if reality itself was struggling to understand what it was looking at. The figure had no defining features, no clear identity, just the unmistakable silhouette of a human. Then the figure spoke. You laughed at us. The voice was calm, too calm. You saw us as weak, fragile, inferior. The Sci-Fi officers stared at the screen, frozen in place. But we are not weak. We are not fragile. The human figure slowly tilted its head, like a predator observing prey. You came to conquer us. The voice darkened. But now, you are the ones trapped. Vorkal's claws dug into his armrest. This had to be a trick, some kind of human psychological warfare. But then, the figure took a step forward, and the void rippled around him. The Sci-Fi monitors glitched, distorting reality itself. The moment his foot touched the darkness, an unseen force tore through the Sci-Fi fleet. Ships began to crumble. Metal twisted and snapped as if unseen hands were crushing them like paper. What is happening? An officer screamed. Vorkal could only watch in horror. You took our son, the voice continued. So we took your power. The astronaut slowly raised his hand. You took our light. The fingers curled into a fist. So now we take everything from you. And then, the Sci-Fi fleet began to vanish. One by one, their warships were erased from existence. Not destroyed, not exploded. Simply erased, like they had never been there at all. And humanity watched, in silence, as their invaders disappeared into the void. The abyss that hungers. The Sci-Fi were no strangers to war. They had conquered, slaughtered, and dominated for millennia. But this was something different. They weren't just losing. They were disappearing, and no one knew where they were going. Sci-Fi command ship, Oblivion. Vorkal could do nothing but watch as his fleet vanished ship by ship, not destroyed, not exploded, simply gone. The human figure on the screen remained motionless, its unreadable silhouette hovering in the void. Then, without warning, it turned its head, and suddenly, Vorkal felt it. A pressure, a weight on his mind, like a black hole pulling his thoughts apart. The figure was looking at him, not at the screen, not at his ship, at him. And then, he was no longer on the bridge. The abyss. Darkness. Vorkal stumbled forward, but there was no ground beneath him. No air. No walls. No fleet. Only an endless black void. Yet he was not alone. Shapes moved in the distance, shifting, writhing. The missing Sci-Fi ships floated lifelessly, drifting like leaves in a dead current. Then something stirred. A massive, slithering form in the shadows. It was not a ship. It was not a creature. It was something worse. A hunger. Vorkal turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then he heard it. A whisper, soft, cold, and unmistakably human. You wanted to take everything from us. A pause. Now see what we take from you. The void moved, and the first Sci-Fi ship was devoured. Not torn apart, not broken. Consumed. Its metal husk twisted and collapsed inward, its existence simply undone. Vorkal screamed, but no sound came out. And then he realized. The abyss wasn't just taking their ships. It was taking them. One by one, the Sci-Fi soldiers began to vanish, their bodies fading like dust in a dying star. Their entire fleet was being erased. Not by war, not by weapons, by something humans had unleashed, and no one would ever remember they existed. Earth. Control room. Dr. Renner watched the final readings come in. The Sci-Fi fleet had reached Phase 3. The entire war was over. Not a single human casualty. Not a single Sci-Fi survivor. Sir, an officer asked hesitantly, what happens to them now? Renner didn't look away from the screen. Nothing. A long silence followed. And what about the thing we used? The officer pressed. The containment field. Renner finally turned to face him. It's still hungry. The screen flickered. The last Sci-Fi ship vanished. And for the first time since the invasion began, humanity was alone again. The horror that whispers. The Sci-Fi were no more. Not dead. Not defeated. Gone. Their fleet, their armies, their entire civilization, erased from existence. And yet humanity was left with an uneasy question. Where did they go? Earth. Deep Space Containment Facility. Dr. Renner stood in the dimly lit observation deck, staring at the void. It wasn't just darkness. It moved. A swirling, shifting mass of nothingness, contained within layers of energy barriers and quantum locks. The air itself felt wrong here, like space was twisting in on itself, constantly hungry for more. This was the price of victory. We should shut it down, Commander Elias said beside him. His voice was quiet, uneasy. This thing is unnatural. Renner didn't respond. He already knew the truth. They couldn't shut it down, because they didn't control it. They had only opened the door. And now something was looking back. The abyss beyond reality. Vorkal floated in the endless dark. He should have been dead. Instead, he was trapped. The whispers were everywhere. Faint, cold, unfamiliar. He could still see the shattered remains of the Sci-Fi fleet. He could still see the twisted remnants of his warriors, frozen mid-scream, their bodies dissolving into the void. And beyond them, something moved. A shape, a presence, something vast and endless, shifting just beyond the edge of comprehension. Then, a voice. Not human, not Sci-Fi. Something older. You brought war to the wrong world. Vorkal's mind fractured. He wanted to scream, but he had no voice, no body, no existence. And then he understood. This place, this abyss, was never empty. It had always been here, waiting. The humans had not created it. They had only fed it. And now it was awake. Earth. Control room. Sir, something's happening. Renner turned to the main screen. The containment field, the one holding the abyss in place, was pulsing. Readings are off the charts. A technician shouted. We're detecting patterns. Something inside is trying to communicate. Renner's blood ran cold. They had won the war. But now something wanted to talk. And humanity had no idea what it was. The answer that should not exist. The Sci-Fi were forgotten. Not by history, not by records, by reality itself. No trace of their empire remained, not in the stars, not in archives, not even in the memories of those who had fought them. It was as if they had never existed, but the abyss remembered. And now, it was speaking. Earth, Deep Space Containment Facility. Dr. Renner stood frozen as the containment field flickered. The abyss pulsed, shifting, twisting, forming words. Not spoken, not heard, felt. You fed us. The technicians recoiled. Some clutched their heads, as if something was pressing into their minds. Now we hunger again. Renner's pulse spiked. It's intelligent, he whispered. It's aware. Commander Elias took a slow step back, his face pale. We didn't erase the Sci-Fi. We gave them to something. Renner swallowed hard, and it wants more. The containment field strained, the walls trembling. More. A technician collapsed, clutching his head. Blood dripped from his nose. The void pulsed. We are coming. The abyss beyond reality. Vorkal was still alive, or what was left of him was. He saw them, the things in the dark. Not creatures, not beings. Concepts, shapes that bent and broke the rules of existence. The Sci-Fi fleet was gone. Their warriors absorbed, their knowledge, their history, consumed. And yet the hunger had only grown. Then, a shift. The abyss turned its attention, not to Vorkal, not to what remained of the Sci-Fi, to something beyond. They are small. They are fragile. They are next. Vorkal's broken mind suddenly understood. The abyss had only tasted a single empire. And now it had noticed something larger, something brighter, something called humanity. Earth, the final warning. Alarms blared. The containment field shuddered, reality itself flickering at the edges. A single word appeared on every screen. Not Sci-Fi. Not human. Something else. A name. Their name. Renner's stomach twisted. They had unleashed something without a name, without a form, without limits. And now it was coming for them. The abyss had whispered its first words to humanity. But its next words would be a feast, and the war had only just begun.